Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I hacked into a McDonald's internal server. What I found links them to a government cover-up. So, before I start, I just want to say, I'm not some hardcore hacker or genius tech prodigy. I'm just a guy with a lot of time on his hands and a knack for breaking into systems I probably shouldn't. My friends call me too curious for my own good, which I guess is a polite way of saying I'm a professional idiot. Anyway, this all started about 2 months ago. I'd just gotten fired from my job at this soul-crushing tech startup. Long story. And I had way too much free time on my hands. When I wasn't doom scrolling TikTok or watching trashy conspiracy theory videos on YouTube, I was tinkering around on the deep web, not to buy anything shady or whatever, just poking around, seeing what I could find. It's like urban exploring, but for servers. One night, I was about 3 hours into a deep web rabbit hole. I had my second Red Bull of the night cracked open, and my computer was glowing in that way that only a half-functioning setup can. I'd started with some generic forums, then found this weird file dump where people post random stuff they've hacked, corporate emails, old software blueprints, nothing too crazy. And then I found it, a McDonald's internal server link. It wasn't labeled anything special, just MACD test/confidential. Honestly, it felt like bait. Like, why would a multi-billion-dollar company have a server floating around on the open deep web? But the thing is, most people don't realize how lazy big companies can be with their internal systems. You think they have this Fort Knox level security, but nah. It's usually just a janky login screen and some outdated encryption. I couldn't resist. I mean, who doesn't want to know the secret to those McDonald's fries, right? The login screen looked ancient, like something from the early 2000s. I ran a brute force script, and no joke, the password was Big Mac 123. That should have been my first red flag. A company that big, and they're using a password you'd expect from a 12-year-old? Yeah, not sketchy at all. Once I was in, it was exactly what I expected at first. Boring spreadsheets, training manuals, inventory reports. I almost called it a night, but then I saw a folder called Black File 47. Okay, that got my attention. The folder wasn't huge, just a few subfolders and some text files. The subfolders had cryptic names like Operation Panopticon and Asset 13. At this point, I was half expecting it to be a prank, like some bored IT guy messing with hackers. But when I opened the first text file, it was different. The file was just raw data logs, GPS coordinates, timestamps, and something labeled delivery units. It didn't make much sense, so I cross-referenced one of the GPS locations. I copy-pasted it into Google Maps, expecting it to lead to some random distribution center. Instead, it dropped me in the middle of nowhere, a desert outside of Area 51. I wish I was joking. At first, I thought, alright, maybe this is just some corporate meme. Like maybe McDonald's execs get bored during board meetings and make fake UFO files. But then I found another text file titled Sequence log 17. It was short, just 3 lines. Subject acquisition confirmed. Site number 3489, Chicago, Illinois. Transported via standard delivery unit number 13. Arrival. Verified primary holding facility. July 14th, 2023. The date caught my eye first. It was from just a few months ago. And that site it mentioned. Chicago is one of McDonald's main headquarters locations. Still, it didn't really add up. Subject acquisition. Transport. It sounded more like military jargon than anything to do with fast food. But then I opened one last file, and this is where things took a sharp turn into what the hell is going on territory. The file was a list of names, ordinary names, Johns, Sarahs, Mikes. Next to each name was a status: acquired, transferred, terminated. The dates were recent. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the names was marked as acquired from my own hometown. I don't know why, but that's what made it feel real. I grew up in this tiny town in Wisconsin, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. If someone had been snatched from there, I'd have heard about it, right? At this point, my heart was racing. I wasn't laughing or joking anymore. This wasn't just some deep web prank. Whatever this was, it was way bigger than me. And then my screen flickered. For a second, I thought my crappy computer was just bugging out. But then a command prompt popped up. Someone, or something, was typing. "You are being monitored. Cease activity immediately." I stared at the message, frozen, and then my Wi-Fi cut out. Now, maybe I'm paranoid. When I went to check my router, I swear I heard something outside my apartment window. A car idling. I live on the 3rd floor, but I could see the headlights cutting through the blinds. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even touch my computer again for a few days. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was probably just some deep web moderator trying to spook me. But then, 2 nights later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging." That was it. No context, no sender info. Just those 2 words. I don't know why, but I can't let this go. I keep thinking about that name from my hometown. Who was it? Why haven't I heard anything about someone going missing? And what does McDonald's have to do with any of this? I think I'm gonna try digging again. This time, I'll be more careful. But if you don't hear from me in a few days, well, now you know why. So, here's the thing about curiosity. It's a killer, and I mean that literally. Every rational part of me was screaming to let this go, to wipe my hard drive, and pretend I never stumbled on that server. But you know how, when someone tells you not to do something, it just makes you want to do it more. Yeah, that's where my head was at. After that text, "Stop digging," I stayed off my computer for a couple of days. Not because I was scared. Okay, maybe a little. But because I needed to think. If whoever sent that text was watching me, hacking into the server again from my own setup was a one-way ticket to getting caught. But I had a plan. There's this 24-hour Starbucks in my city, the kind that's always crawling with students and digital nomads. It's the perfect place to blend in while using their Wi-Fi. I packed up my laptop, threw on a hoodie, and headed out just after midnight. The vibe at the Starbucks was chill. Music playing low, a handful of people typing away on their Macs. Nobody paid any attention to me, which is exactly what I wanted. Once I was logged into the free Wi-Fi, I fired up my tools and went straight back to that McDonald's server. The weird thing? The login page was gone. Like, the whole thing had just vanished. At first, I thought they'd shut it down, but I remembered I'd saved the direct IP address. I typed it in manually, and boom, it was still there. Hidden, but not gone. This time, though, it wasn't a login page. It was a live feed. At first, I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. The camera was grainy, like it was shot on some cheap 90s surveillance system. The view was of a dimly lit room, cement walls, no windows. A metal table sat in the middle, and on the table was a tray with something that looked like meat. I couldn't tell. There was no sound, just the hum of the camera. Then the feed cut to a different angle. This one showed a long hallway, also cement, with numbered doors on either side. Each door had a little hatch near the bottom, like a mail slot. Something about the way the hallway was lit, just a single flickering bulb every 10 feet, made my skin crawl. I couldn't tell if this was a basement, a bunker, or something else entirely. Before I could process what I was seeing, the feed changed again. Now it was outside. A white van was parked in front of what looked like an ordinary McDonald's. You know the kind. Bright yellow arches, cheery red roof. The kind of place you'd take your kid for a happy meal. But the van? It had no branding, no plates. Just this plain, unmarked vehicle, sitting there like it didn't belong. Then, something moved. I leaned in closer. 2 people stepped out of the van, both wearing what looked like McDonald's uniforms. Only they weren't the friendly, smiling type you see behind the counter. Their faces were blank, emotionless, almost robotic. One of them opened the back of the van, and I swear to God, I saw them unload a body bag. Not a box, not some oversized package. A freaking body bag. I sat there, frozen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of twisted marketing campaign or deep fake experiment. But the way the bag sagged as they carried it inside, the way it dragged against the asphalt, it didn't look fake. It looked too real. I clicked around, trying to find more feeds, and that's when I noticed the timestamps. The live feed I was watching, it wasn't just some random McDonald's across the country. It was my McDonald's, the one 5 blocks from where I was sitting. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed my phone and pulled up Uber. I typed in the address for the McDonald's, thinking maybe I could get close enough to see the van for myself. I mean, surely if something shady was happening, I'd notice, right? The Uber driver didn't ask any questions, which was good, because I didn't have answers. When we pulled up to the McDonald's, it looked normal. Bright lights, a couple of cars in the drive-thru, the usual late-night vibe. But the van? It was gone. I almost got out of the car, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of that body bag, or maybe it was the fact that the drive-thru workers weren't acting normal. They weren't smiling, they weren't joking around. They were just there, robotic, like the people from the van. I told the driver to keep going. No way was I walking into that place. When I got back to my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the live feed, the hallway, the body bag, the way those workers didn't feel human. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was just sleep deprived or watching too many horror movies. But then I noticed something on my phone. I hadn't closed the Uber app yet, and there was a notification. Your driver has a message. I opened it, expecting some generic, "Thanks for the ride," text. Instead, all it said was, "You were being watched." I swear my heart stopped. How would the driver know? Did I say something? Do something? Or was this connected to the server? I didn't know, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I packed a bag and drove to a motel on the other side of the city, thinking I'd be safe there. Spoiler, I wasn't. At around 3 a.m., I heard something outside my door. Not footsteps exactly, but this dragging sound, like someone was pulling something heavy. I peeked through the peephole, and there it was, a clown. Not the goofy, balloon animal kind. This clown had a smudged face, like their makeup had been hastily applied, and they were wearing what looked like a McDonald's uniform underneath a tattered trench coat. They stood there for what felt like forever, staring at my door. Then they bent down and slid something under it, a single fry, burnt black at the tip. When I opened the door, yeah, I know, dumb move, the hallway was empty. No clown, no footsteps, just silence. But on the fry, written in ketchup, was one word: leave. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat there, staring at the fry, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some deep web prank. It was real, and I was in way over my head. You'd think after finding a fry covered in ketchup and cryptic messages, I'd call it quits, pack up, leave town, maybe even change my name. But no, I didn't leave. I didn't stop. I couldn't. That's the thing about fear. It either makes you freeze or pushes you deeper. And me, I went deeper. That night at the motel, I kept thinking about the clown, about the live feed, about the body bag. It didn't feel random. It felt like I'd tripped over something I wasn't supposed to see, something bigger than McDonald's or their servers. And that fry under my door? It wasn't just a warning. It felt personal, like whoever or whatever was behind this wanted me to know I was part of it now. I threw the fry in the trash, grabbed my laptop, and started digging again. I know. Why didn't you just leave it alone? But here's the thing. When you're staring into the unknown, running away doesn't feel like an option. I had to know what was going on. The first thing I did was check the local news, looking for anything that could explain what I'd seen on the live feed. I searched for missing persons, crimes, anything unusual. And sure enough, there was a story. 3 weeks ago, a man named Kyle Reynolds had gone missing. Kyle wasn't just anyone though. He was a former manager at, wait for it, McDonald's. His co-workers said he'd been acting paranoid before he disappeared, talking about secret files and delivery trucks that didn't make sense. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. The article mentioned that Kyle had been last seen outside the very same McDonald's where I'd seen the van. At this point, my hands were shaking. I kept scrolling, looking for more. Another article popped up, this one about a lawsuit filed against McDonald's by a group of employees in Chicago. They claimed they were being forced to work late-night shifts with unusual delivery protocols. The article didn't go into detail, but one employee said she'd been fired after asking why the back freezer was being secured by armed guards. Armed guards at a McDonald's. I leaned back in my chair, my mind spinning. Was this some kind of human trafficking ring? A front for something darker? Every theory I came up with sounded crazier than the last. But then I remembered something from the live feed, the hallway, the numbered doors. I hadn't thought much about them at the time, but now they felt important. What if those doors were holding cells? What if Kyle Reynolds had been in one of them? I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to do something. So I did the stupidest thing imaginable. I went back to the McDonald's. It was 2 a.m. when I pulled into the parking lot. The place was dead. Just one car in the drive-thru and a few flickering lights inside. My heart was pounding as I parked across the street, trying to look casual, while keeping an eye on the building. At first, nothing happened, just the usual late-night quiet. But then I saw it. A white van. It pulled into the lot, headlights off, and stopped at the back entrance. 2 men got out, both wearing those weird, emotionless expressions I'd seen in the live feed. They opened the back doors of the van, and I swear my stomach turned to ice. There was another body bag. I knew I should have stayed put, but my body moved before my brain could catch up. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and started creeping toward the building. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they'd hear it, but the men didn't even glance my way. They were too busy hauling the bag through the back door. The closer I got, the worse it smelled. It wasn't the usual fast food grease smell. It was metallic, rotten, like blood. I crouched behind a dumpster, my phone still recording, and peeked around the corner. That's when I saw the freezer. It wasn't a normal walk-in freezer. This thing was huge, with reinforced steel doors and a keypad lock. The men pushed the body bag through the doors, and for a second, I thought I saw it move. Like whatever was inside wasn't completely dead. I had to fight the urge to throw up. My hands were trembling so badly, I almost dropped my phone. I was about to back away when I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing here?" I spun around, and there he was, the clown. Up close, he was even worse than I'd imagined. His makeup was smeared, his eyes bloodshot, and his smile didn't move. It was painted on like some grotesque parody of happiness. And in his hand, a spatula, not the plastic kind you'd use at home, the industrial kind. The edges were sharp enough to cut. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "You're not supposed to see this," the clown said, stepping closer. The spatula glinted under the flickering lights. "Nobody's supposed to see this." And then he lunged. I don't even remember getting to my car. 1 second, I was staring into his dead eyes, and the next, I was tearing out of the parking lot, my tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town, my phone still clutched in my hand. When I finally pulled over, I checked the footage. It was all there. The van, the body bag, the freezer, and the clown. Especially the clown. I thought about posting it online, blowing the whole thing wide open. But then I remembered the fry, the text, the way they'd found me so easily before. If I'd posted this, they'd know, and they'd come for me. I ended up crashing at a friend's house that night. I didn't tell her anything, just that I needed a place to stay. She didn't ask questions, which was probably for the best. But when I woke up the next morning, there was something waiting for me on the kitchen counter. A Happy Meal. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. I was sure of it. The box was pristine, the kind you'd get if you ordered it fresh. But when I opened it, the food was wrong. The fries were burned black, and the burger wasn't a burger. It was raw meat, dripping blood onto the cardboard, and on the inside of the box, scrawled in thick red marker, was a message. "You can't run forever." The sight of that Happy Meal on the counter did something to me. I don't even know how to describe it. Like my brain short-circuited. I just stood there, staring at the box, at the blood pooling under the raw meat, at those words, "You can't run forever." The box was cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer before it was placed there. My friend was still asleep, and the apartment was dead quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge. For a moment, I considered waking her up, showing her what I'd found, but something stopped me. Whoever left the box here didn't want her. They wanted me. If I dragged her into this, who knows what would happen? I threw the box into the trash, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and shoved it deep under the sink. It didn't matter though. I couldn't unsee it. The stench of raw meat lingered in the air, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words scrawled in red. You can't run forever. I knew I wasn't safe anymore. Not here, not anywhere. But running felt pointless. Wherever I went, they'd find me. They already had. If I wanted to survive this, I had to find out what the hell was going on and stop it. That's when I decided to go back to the beginning, back to the server. I found another Starbucks on the other side of town. By now, I was paranoid as hell, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds and sitting where I could see the door. I didn't even bother ordering coffee. I just opened my laptop and logged onto the Wi-Fi. If this was going to be my last deep dive, I wasn't holding back. I started with the live feed. It was still there, still cycling through those same eerie angles, the cement hallway, the freezer, the creepy numbered doors. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. One of the doors, number 7, was slightly open. The camera feed lingered on it for only a second, but it was enough. I could see the edge of the room behind the door, just barely. It wasn't empty. There was something hanging from the ceiling, swaying slowly. A person. Their arms were tied above their head, and their body was limp, like they'd been there for hours, or longer. My stomach churned, but I kept watching. The feed switched back to the van outside, and this time I noticed something else. A logo. It wasn't the McDonald's arches. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. A small black triangle painted near the van's rear bumper. I didn't recognize it, but it felt important, like a breadcrumb leading to something bigger. I grabbed a screenshot and started digging online. The triangle wasn't just a random symbol. It was tied to something called Project Grind. At first, all I found were conspiracy theories, threads on Reddit, obscure blogs, cryptic videos on YouTube. But the deeper I went, the more it started to connect. According to the conspiracy crowd, Project Grind was a government-funded program designed to maximize efficiency in food production. It started decades ago, but somewhere along the way, it got dark. People whispered about missing persons being repurposed into food, about experiments with human meat, about how fast food chains were involved. Most of it sounded like lunatic ramblings, but after what I'd seen, it didn't feel so crazy. One blog post stood out. It was written by someone claiming to be an ex-McDonald's employee, and it described a secret underground facility hidden beneath select locations. The post talked about processing units, collection squads, and something called the meat grinder. Apparently, anyone who got too close to the truth ended up in the grinder. The longer I read, the more I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just some creepy urban legend. It was real. The live feed, the clown, the body bags, it all fit. And the worst part? My name wasn't safe. I'd been digging too much, seeing too much. It was only a matter of time before I ended up on their list. I decided to go back to the McDonald's one last time, not to spy from the outside, like before. I needed to get inside. If there was a hidden facility, I had to find it. Maybe I'd die trying, but at least I'd go down knowing I didn't run away. It was almost 3 a.m. when I pulled up to the same McDonald's from before. The parking lot was empty, but the lights were still on. I parked a block away, tucked my phone into my pocket, and slipped around the back. The freezer door was shut, just like before, but I noticed something else. A keypad near the side door. I didn't know the code, but I had a hunch. Big Mac 1, 2, 3. I punched it in, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air was colder than I expected. The kitchen was empty, but the smell of meat was overpowering. I crept through the kitchen, past the fries and grills, until I found a metal hatch in the floor. There was no lock, just a heavy handle. I pulled it open and stared into the dark abyss below. A ladder led down into the darkness. The smell was worse here, thick, metallic, nauseating. I climbed down slowly, one rung at a time, until my feet hit the cement floor. The air was damp, heavy, like a basement that hadn't been aired out in years. I was there, the whole way from the live feed. The flickering lights overhead cast long, eerie shadows, and the sound of my footsteps echoed down the corridor. The numbered doors stretched endlessly in both directions. Most were shut, but one, the one from the feed, was still slightly open. Room 7. I stepped closer, my hand shaking as I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Rot, decay, death. And then I saw them. Bodies, dozens of them, hanging from the ceiling like slabs of meat in a butcher shop. Their skin was pale, their eyes empty, their mouths twisted into silent screams. Some were missing limbs, others had been gutted, and in the corner a machine was grinding something. I didn't want to know what. I was about to run when I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, coming from the shadows behind me. "You shouldn't have come here." I turned, and there he was, the clown. Only this time, he wasn't alone. 2 of the men from the van were with him, their faces just as blank and emotionless as before. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The clown stepped closer, holding something long and sharp, a meat hook. "You thought you could expose us?" he hissed, his painted smile stretching wider. "You're just another piece of the puzzle, another ingredient." Before I could move, they lunged. I don't know how I got away. It's all a blur now, running, screaming, the metallic taste of fear in my throat. I don't even remember getting back to my car, but somehow I did. And now I'm here, writing this, trying to make sense of what I saw. But I know one thing for sure. They won't stop. Not until I'm in the grinder too. I wish I could tell you I made it out okay. That I packed up my life, moved to some remote cabin in the woods, and never looked back. But that's not how this ends. The truth is, I don't think I ever had a real chance. Once I went down that ladder, once I stepped into that hallway, my fate was sealed. And deep down, I think I always knew it. After that night, I didn't go home. I drove for hours, aimlessly, trying to outrun the image of those bodies hanging in room 7. Their faces haunt me, some of them still alive when they were strung up, others frozen in the moment they died. The smell of rot clung to me, no matter how many times I tried to wash it off. And the machine in the corner, grinding something wet and raw. I don't think I'll ever stop hearing that sound. I ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of town, far enough away that I thought I might be safe for a little while. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat there with my back against the wall, clutching a kitchen knife I'd stolen from my friend's apartment. My phone buzzed twice with unknown numbers, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every shadow in the room felt alive. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like someone creeping closer. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit there waiting for them to find me. I needed to hit back to bring this whole thing to light before it was too late. I uploaded the footage from my phone to an encrypted cloud account and drafted a post for every platform I could think of: Reddit, YouTube, Twitter, anywhere that might take notice. I included everything I had: the screenshots, the videos, even the articles I'd found about Kyle Reynolds and the Chicago lawsuit. If I was going down, I wasn't going down quietly. But just as I was about to hit post, the power in my room cut out. At first, I thought it was just the motel being cheap, but then I heard it: tires crunching gravel. I peeked out the window and saw them. The white van. It was parked just outside, its engine idling. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to. I knew they were here for me. My first instinct was to run. But where? The motel was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of open road. Even if I made it to my car, they'd catch me before I got anywhere. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, climbing the metal stairs outside my room. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The knock came, 3 sharp raps, like they were taunting me. I didn't answer. The door rattled, the handle twisting, but the chair held, for now. "You've seen too much," a voice called from the other side. It wasn't the clown. This voice was calm, professional, like someone giving a presentation at a board meeting. "We warned you, multiple times." I didn't respond. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear them. "We don't want to hurt you," the voice continued, a blatant lie. "Just come with us. We'll make it quick." I pressed my back harder against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. The handle stopped twisting. For a moment, there was silence, and then, without warning, the door slammed inward. The chair splintered, the hinges screamed, and they were inside. The first man came at me fast, but I swung the knife, catching him across the arm. He didn't make a sound, just staggered back like a malfunctioning robot. The second man lunged, but I kicked him in the knee, sending him sprawling. For a second, I thought I had a chance. And then I saw him. The clown. He stepped through the broken door, his painted face twisted into something even more grotesque than before. His smile was wider now, the corners of his lips smeared with what looked like dried blood. In his hand, he held a mallet, a heavy rusted thing that looked more like a weapon than a tool. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice high and sing-song, like he was mocking me. "But that's okay. I like it when they fight." I swung the knife at him, but he caught my wrist mid-swing. His grip was inhumanly strong, crushing my bones until I dropped the blade. The mallet came down, grazing my shoulder and sending me crashing to the floor. Pain shot through me like electricity, but I forced myself to crawl toward the door. I didn't make it far. One of the men grabbed my ankle and dragged me back, his strength unnatural, like he wasn't entirely human. I kicked and screamed, but it didn't matter. The clown crouched over me, his painted face inches from mine. "You've been a very naughty boy," he said, tilting his head like a curious dog. "But don't worry, we have a special place for you." The last thing I remember was the mallet coming down toward my head. When I woke up, I was in the hallway. The hallway, the cement walls, the flickering lights, the numbered doors. It was all real. My wrists were bound and my head was pounding, but I was alive. For now. They dragged me toward one of the rooms. Room 13. The door creaked open, revealing something worse than anything I had seen before. The walls were lined with meat hooks, each one holding pieces, limbs, torsos, chunks of flesh stripped down to the bone. In the center of the room was the grinder. It was massive, a horrifying amalgamation of metal gears and rotating blades. Blood and viscera coated its surface, dripping into a steel basin below. I couldn't tell if it was fresh or if it had been there for years. "Welcome to the menu," the clown said, laughing as he shoved me toward the machine. "You're going to make someone very happy." I thrashed against the men holding me, but it was useless. They lifted me onto a conveyor belt that led straight into the grinder. The blades whirred, spinning faster as I got closer. The smell of blood and rot was overwhelming, and the sound of grinding metal filled my ears. And then, just as the blades were inches away, everything stopped. The lights flickered, the machines ground to a halt, and the men froze like statues. For a second, I thought it was some kind of miracle, but then I heard it. A voice, crackling through the intercom system. "Subject 47 compromised. Reset and contain." The men snapped back into motion, but instead of shoving me into the grinder, they pulled me off the conveyor belt and slammed me onto the floor. The clown leaned down, his smile gone, replaced by something darker. "You're lucky," he hissed. "They want you alive. For now. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks. Time doesn't feel real anymore. They keep me in one of the numbered rooms, feeding me scraps of who knows what. I can hear the grinder running at all hours, the screams of others echoing down the hallway. I don't think anyone else has made it out alive, but I'm not giving up. I've been carving into the wall with a shard of bone I found in my food, marking the days, planning my escape. If you're reading this, it means I found a way to post it. It means there's still a chance. But if I don't make it, stay away from McDonald's. The Illuminati is using Google Maps to control us. I found the proof on the dark web. Alright, let me start this by saying I'm not some conspiracy nut. I'm a regular guy, 28 years old, live in a small apartment in Chicago, work a boring IT job that pays just enough to keep my fridge stocked and my Netflix subscription active. I like to browse Reddit, TikTok, and sometimes I wander into the dark web, not because I'm doing anything illegal, hell no, but because I've always had this fascination with the unknown. You know, those stories you hear about secret government experiments, creepy videos, or the red rooms people swear are real, but no one can confirm. I just wanted to see for myself if there was anything out there worth the hype. That's where this all started. About 2 weeks ago, I was sitting on my couch at 2 a.m., the city lights bleeding through my blinds. I had just finished binging Black Mirror, you know, the episode where everyone's life is rated with likes. Freaky stuff. Anyway, I was in that weird post-binge days, scrolling aimlessly on Reddit when I came across this post in a small conspiracy subreddit. The title was simple: Google Maps isn't what you think it is. The post was short, like the person who wrote it didn't want to stick around long enough to explain. All it said was, "You think Google Maps is just an app? Look deeper. It's not about getting you from point A to point B. It's about controlling you. Don't believe me? Check out the file labeled Atlas on the Hidden Wiki. You'll see." Now, if you've never heard of the Hidden Wiki, it's basically like a directory for dark web links. I'd used it a couple of times to find obscure forums and weird archived content, but this Atlas thing? Never heard of it. The post was already deleted by the time I clicked on it again, which should have been my first red flag. But curiosity got the best of me. So, I fired up Tor, the browser you use for dark web stuff, found the hidden wiki, and after some digging, there it was. A link labeled Atlas Archive, the Google Maps project. Clicking it felt wrong. Like, I can't explain it, but you know that feeling when you're in a dark room and you swear something's watching you. That's how I felt. But I clicked anyway. The link took me to this ancient-looking site. Black background, green text, very matrixy, if you know what I mean. At the top of the page, there was a warning in bold letters. For eyes only. You have been warned. Below that, there was a file. Just one. It was labeled atlas.exe. Now, I'm not stupid. I know better than to download random files off the dark web. But the curiosity was killing me. What was so dangerous about a file connected to Google Maps? What were they hiding? I thought, worst case scenario, I'd get some crappy malware and I'd have to wipe my computer. So, I downloaded it. As soon as the file finished downloading, my screen went black. For a split second, I thought I'd bricked my laptop, but then white text started appearing on the screen, like it was typing itself. Welcome to the Atlas Project. The map is not the territory. That's it. No instructions, no context, just those cryptic words. Then, the file auto-launched, and my Google Maps app opened. At first, it looked normal. My location pin dropped right on my apartment. But then, the map started glitching. It zoomed in and out on its own, spinning wildly until it landed on some random spot in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. No land, no markers, just open water. Then, a new pin dropped, bright red, with the label, Site 8, Restricted. At this point, I was freaking out. Like, what the hell is Site 8? I clicked the pin, and suddenly, a string of coordinates popped up, followed by an address. It was somewhere in Nevada, specifically near Area 51. I thought it was some elaborate prank, or ARG, alternate reality game. But when I tried to close the app, it wouldn't let me. Every time I clicked X, it would just reopen the map, showing that same red pin. My laptop fan was going crazy, the whole thing heating up, like it was about to catch fire. Then, the text appeared again, overlaying the map. The eyes in the sky are always watching. That's when I yanked the power cord. The next day, I told myself it was probably just some weird malware designed to scare people. I wiped my laptop, reinstalled everything, and moved on. But that's when the weird stuff started happening. The first thing I noticed was my phone. Every time I opened Google Maps, it automatically routed me to random places. A Starbucks in Idaho, a McDonald's in Tokyo, a park in Berlin I'd never heard of. Even when I wasn't using the app, my location would randomly update to places I hadn't been. It was creepy, but I figured it was just some bug caused by whatever I downloaded. Then, my TikTok feed started getting flooded with videos about surveillance and secret societies. Like, every other video was about the Illuminati, satellites watching us, or some deep state conspiracy crap. At first, I thought it was just the algorithm picking up on my recent Google searches, but it was too specific. Some of the videos were mentioning things I hadn't even Googled. Like there was this one guy talking about red pins on Google Maps and how they were tied to shadow governments. I hadn't told anyone about what I saw, so how the hell was it showing up on my feed? The final straw happened 3 days ago. I was sitting at a Starbucks downtown, scrolling through Instagram when my phone buzzed. It was a Google Maps notification. It said, "You're near Site 8. Proceed to the marked location." I almost dropped my phone. First of all, I was nowhere near Nevada. Second, when I opened the app, the map zoomed in on my location inside the Starbucks, and there was a red pin sitting directly on top of my table. That's when I noticed something else. There was a guy sitting across from me, maybe 2 tables down, middle-aged, wearing a plain black hoodie and sunglasses. He wasn't drinking anything, wasn't scrolling his phone, just sitting there, staring at me. When I looked up, he stood, slid his hands into his hoodie pocket, and walked out the door. But as he left, he dropped something on my table. It was a folded piece of paper. Written on it, in shaky handwriting, were 2 words, "Stop digging." And that's when I realized, whoever or whatever was behind this, they weren't just watching me, they were close. After that Starbucks incident, I couldn't stop thinking about the guy who left the note. It wasn't just the message, "Stop digging," but the way he stared at me, like he knew exactly what I'd done, like he'd been watching me for a lot longer than I realized. I should have let it go. I should have taken the note as a warning and walked away from this whole thing. But something about the way it all connected, Google Maps, the dark web, the Illuminati conspiracies, kept gnawing at me. It wasn't just paranoia. I knew there was more to this than random glitches and cryptic notes. That night, I locked my doors, shut my blinds, and reopened the coordinates on my phone. The pin in Nevada, Site 8, was still there, but there were more now. Dozens of red pins had appeared across the map, scattered all over the world. Each one had a label. Site 3, restricted. Site 14, authorized personnel only. Site 23, observation hub. Some of them were in places you'd expect. Deserts, remote islands, the Arctic. But others, they were in places people actually live. One was smack in the middle of Times Square. Another was inside a McDonald's in Paris. There was even one at the base of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. I couldn't stop staring at them, trying to make sense of what these locations could mean. And then my phone vibrated again. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an app notification. It was just static, like the kind you hear on an old radio, but softer, faint. Then a voice came through. I swear to God, I heard a voice. It said, "You've been flagged. Await further instruction." I threw my phone across the room. The screen shattered on impact, but the voice didn't stop. It was coming from the cracked speaker now, distorted and warbled. "You've been flagged. Await further instruction." I unplugged my laptop, grabbed my phone, and shoved it in a drawer. I didn't sleep that night. Every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, even the wind outside, felt like it was something, someone, creeping closer. I started to wonder if this was how people went crazy. If paranoia was like some kind of virus that crept into your brain and turned every shadow into a threat. But the next morning, I found something that made me realize I wasn't just losing my mind. Around 7 a.m., I went to grab my phone from the drawer. It was dead, obviously, but when I plugged it in and turned it on, there was a new file on my home screen. I hadn't downloaded it. It was just there. The file was named reddoor.jpg. At first, I thought it was just a random photo, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me. The photo was taken through my apartment window, zoomed in so close, you could see the reflection of the camera in the glass. I recognized the hoodie I'd been wearing the night before, the way I was hunched over my laptop, staring at the screen. My blinds had been closed when I went to bed, but in the photo, they were cracked just enough for someone to see through. I felt sick. Whoever had taken that picture was watching me while I was inside my apartment. Underneath the photo, there was a single line of text. "You're already inside the map." I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was a prank, some hacker messing with me for fun. But deep down, I knew better. The voice, the photo, the pins on the map. It wasn't random. It was targeted. And I was the target. That night, I decided to do something really, really stupid. There was another pin on the map, one I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't labeled like the others, just a red dot sitting in the middle of an abandoned strip mall, about 30 minutes from my apartment. I'd driven past that place dozens of times before, but I never gave it much thought. All the storefronts were boarded up, the parking lot full of weeds and cracked asphalt. The kind of place where teenagers went to drink or tag walls with graffiti. But now it was marked. I told myself I wasn't going to go. I told myself I was done with all of this. But around midnight, I found myself in my car, staring at the pin on my phone, driving toward that empty strip mall. It was stupid. It was reckless. But I needed answers. The parking lot was dead silent when I got there, except for the faint buzz of a flickering streetlight. I parked my car near the edge of the lot, killed the engine, and stepped out. The map on my phone led me to one of the boarded-up stores, the third one from the left. The windows were covered in plywood, but the front door was slightly ajar. That's when I saw it. On the door, someone had spray-painted a red symbol. It looked like an eye inside a triangle, surrounded by jagged lines. I recognized it immediately. It was the same symbol you always see in Illuminati conspiracy theories. But seeing it in person, on a door that was clearly waiting for me to open it, it felt different. I pushed the door open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was metallic and sharp, like rust and bleach mixed together. The inside was pitch black, but my phone's flashlight cut through the darkness just enough to make out the walls. They were covered in photos, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pinned up with no pattern or logic. But the photos weren't just random people. They were places: McDonald's parking lots, crowded subways, tourist spots, and in every photo, there was a red pin somewhere in the background, on a car, on a building, even on people's clothes. The pins were everywhere, like someone or something was tracking these places through the photos. And then I saw the table. In the center of the room, there was a long metal table, covered in, I don't even know what to call it. It was like a dissected computer, but more organic. Wires and screens tangled with something that looked like flesh, pulsing, moving. I felt my stomach churn just looking at it. That's when I noticed the sound. It was coming from the back of the room, a low, mechanical hum, like something was alive back there. I should have turned around. I should have run. But instead, I walked toward the sound. When I reached the back of the room, I saw it. A door painted bright red, the same symbol etched into its surface. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to, because as soon as I got close, the door opened on its own. And what I saw on the other side? Let's just say, it wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was something I'm still trying to make sense of. Something alive. I don't know how to describe what was behind that red door. Even now, days later, it feels like my brain is actively trying to erase the memory. It wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. At least not in the way we normally think about places. It was like stepping into the static between TV channels, a void where nothing made sense. My body felt weightless, like I'd been unhooked from gravity, but the air, or whatever passed for air, was heavy, thick, and buzzing like it was alive. The walls weren't walls. They shifted and rippled like water, pulsating with faint, dim lights that seemed to blink in patterns, almost like Morse code. And then there was the sound. I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. This low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate inside my chest. Every time the hum grew louder, I felt this stabbing pain in the back of my skull, like needles burrowing into my brain. I thought I was going to pass out right there, but then the door slammed shut behind me, and everything went silent. For a second, I thought I was dead, but then I saw the chair. It was sitting in the middle of the void, bolted to the floor, or whatever the hell I was standing on. It looked ancient, like something out of an old torture chamber. Rusted metal, leather straps dangling from the armrests, and a strange device mounted on the backrest. It reminded me of one of those headpieces you see in medieval execution devices, but with wires snaking out of it, leading into the walls, or whatever those shifting things were. The chair wasn't empty. There was a man sitting in it. He was slumped forward, his head hanging at an unnatural angle, like he didn't have the strength to hold it up anymore. His clothes were shredded, covered in dried blood, and something else. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his arms were strapped down so tightly that the leather had cut into his flesh. But the worst part, his face. His eyes were sewn shut. Thick, black thread stitched across his eyelids, crisscrossing like someone had gone out of their way to make sure he'd never open them again. His mouth was sewn shut too, but not with thread. It looked like metal staples, jagged and uneven, piercing his lips together like some kind of brutal industrial experiment. And yet, somehow, he was still alive. His chest was rising and falling, shallow and uneven, like each breath was a struggle. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at him. And then, he started to move. It was subtle at first. A twitch in his fingers, a slight jerk of his head. Then his whole body started convulsing, shaking against the straps like he was having a seizure. The sound came back, the low, guttural hum. But this time, it wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from him. I swear to God, it sounded like he was trying to speak. His head snapped back, his sewn shut eyes pointing directly at me. And I heard it. A voice. Not out loud, but inside my head. They're watching. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to explode. The hum grew louder, deeper, and the man started shaking violently, his body thrashing against the chair like he was trying to break free. And then the walls started closing in. The rippling, pulsating surface of the room began shifting toward me, the dim lights blinking faster and faster. It was like the entire void was collapsing, folding in on itself. The man in the chair let out this guttural scream, not from his mouth, but from somewhere deep inside his chest. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just noise. It was inside my head, vibrating through my skull, like it was trying to tear me apart from the inside out. I don't remember how I got out. 1 second, I was in that hellish void, and the next, I was outside the strip mall, lying on the cracked asphalt. My head was pounding, my ears were ringing, and my hands were covered in blood. But it wasn't my blood. When I stumbled back to my car, I noticed something on the windshield. A piece of paper, folded neatly, wedged under the wiper blade. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely open it. But when I did, I almost threw up. It was a photo of the man in the chair. Only now, his eyes weren't sewn shut. They were wide open, bloodshot and glassy, staring directly at the camera. His mouth was open too, stretched into this grotesque, unnatural smile, like his face had been pulled apart by invisible hooks. On the back of the photo, there was a single line of text. "You're one of us now." I drove home in a daze, barely able to focus on the road. Every time I stopped at a red light, I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something sitting in the back seat. By the time I got to my apartment, I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. That's when I noticed the van. It was parked across the street, just outside the convenience store. A plain white van with no windows, the kind you always see in those true crime documentaries about kidnappings. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I stepped inside, I saw it. The silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. They weren't moving, just sitting there, staring at my building. That night, I barricaded myself in my apartment. I pushed my couch against the door, locked all the windows, and unplugged every electronic device I owned. But it didn't matter. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. I didn't want to check it, but I couldn't help myself. When I picked it up, the screen was already on. Google Maps was open, and there was a new pin. This time, it wasn't in some random place. It was on my apartment, and underneath it, there was a message. "We're here." I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, getting closer and closer to my door. And then, someone knocked. 3 times. The knocks didn't stop. 3 at a time. Slow, deliberate, heavy, like whoever or whatever was on the other side wanted me to know they weren't in a rush. I stood there, frozen, clutching a kitchen knife I'd grabbed off the counter. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was just some neighbor, maybe a delivery driver at the wrong door. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The third knock came, louder this time. And then a voice, software, calm, familiar. "Open the door. We just want to talk." It was my voice. I don't mean it sounded like me. I mean it was me. The same tone, the same cadence. Like someone had taken a recording of my own voice and played it back through the door. I took a step back, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. The voice came again. "Come on, don't make this harder than it has to be." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then the door handle started to turn. The barricade I'd built, my couch, the chairs, the makeshift pile of furniture. I thought it would be enough to keep them out. But the handle kept turning, slower and slower, like they were testing it, waiting for me to do something. And then it stopped. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd left. Maybe this was all some sick joke, and whoever was out there had finally given up. But then I heard it. A scraping sound. Metal against wood, slow and deliberate, carving into the door. I don't know how long it went on. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. But eventually, the scraping stopped, and something slid under the door. A piece of paper, folded neatly in half. I didn't want to touch it. Hell, I didn't even want to look at it. But something about it felt magnetic, like I didn't have a choice. I dropped the knife, crawled forward on shaking hands and knees, and picked it up. On the paper, There was a message written in blocky, uneven handwriting. You can't run. You can't hide. Open the door, or we'll open it for you. My stomach turned. The edges of the paper were wet, stained with something dark and sticky. Blood. I didn't wait for the next knock. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone, and climbed out the window. I live on the second floor, so the drop wasn't far, but I twisted my ankle when I hit the ground. The pain was sharp, immediate, but I didn't stop moving. I hobbled to my car, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see someone chasing me. The van was still there, parked across the street. The silhouette in the driver's seat was gone. I didn't wait to find out where they'd gone. I got in my car, started the engine, and floored it. The city was empty, or at least it felt that way. Every street I drove down was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. No headlights, no pedestrians, just me and the endless rows of darkened buildings. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get as far away from my apartment as possible. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stopped at a red light, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. A figure standing just outside the glow of the streetlights. A pair of headlights in the distance, always turning when I turned, stopping when I stopped. By the time I hit the highway, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I needed to pull over, catch my breath, figure out what the hell I was going to do. There was a gas station up ahead, one of those 24-hour places with flickering neon signs, and a single car parked out front. I pulled in, parked, and got out. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere with other people, somewhere I could feel safe. But the gas station was empty. No cashier, no customers, just rows of snacks and drinks, untouched, like the place had been abandoned in the middle of the night. I walked up to the counter, my footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. Hello? My voice sounded small, weak, swallowed by the silence. No response. That's when I noticed the security monitors behind the counter. There were 6 of them, each one showing a different angle of the gas station. Inside, outside, the parking lot. On the bottom left screen, I saw my car. And standing next to it was a man. He was wearing a black hoodie, the same kind the guy at Starbucks had been wearing, and his head was tilted to the side, like he was studying the car, studying me. I turned around, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I looked out the window, the parking lot was empty. I turned back to the screen. The man was gone. I ran out of the gas station, jumped in my car, and slammed the door shut. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. But just as I started the engine, my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see another message, another pin, another photo. But my hands moved on their own, pulling the phone from my pocket. There was a new notification. It wasn't a text. It wasn't from Google Maps. It was from the security app I'd installed on my laptop months ago, the one that syncs with my apartment's Wi-Fi. The message read, "Motion detected, living room." My blood ran cold. I stared at the notification, my mind racing. There was no way someone could have gotten in. I'd locked the door, barricaded it, but then the notification refreshed. Motion detected, bedroom. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. And then the final notification came through. Motion detected, front door. There was an image attached to this one, a still frame, from my apartment security camera, taken just moments ago. It was me, standing in the hallway, staring at the camera, smiling. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and floored it. The gas station disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the night. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just knew I had to keep moving. But as I drove, I noticed something in the distance. Headlights, a pair of them, glowing faintly in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car. But no matter how fast I drove, the headlights stayed the same distance behind me. And then I realized they weren't following me. They were leading me. The GPS on my phone lit up on its own, a new pin dropping onto the map. It was labeled home. But the coordinates weren't for my apartment. They were for me. I knew I couldn't stop. Stopping wasn't an option anymore. The headlights in the rearview mirror weren't headlights. Not in the way we understand them. They didn't belong to a car. They belonged to something else. Something that had been following me ever since I downloaded that cursed file. Ever since I opened the door I should have never touched. But it wasn't just following me now. It was hurting me. The coordinates on my phone hadn't changed. The pin labeled home still pointed to some godforsaken spot in the middle of nowhere, miles away from anything I recognized. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, no matter how many turns I made, the GPS kept recalculating, pulling me back to the same path. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, an infinite loop of asphalt and dead silence. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The trees. At first, I thought they were just part of the scenery, shadowy outlines lining the side of the road. But as I drove further, I realized they weren't trees at all. They were people, hundreds of them, standing perfectly still on the side of the road, their faces obscured by the darkness. No movement, no sound, just rows of silent figures staring at my car as I sped past. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine roaring in protest, but the faster I went, the closer they seemed to get. They weren't moving, but the road was bending, curving in ways that didn't make sense, forcing me closer and closer to the edge of the forest. And then the figures started stepping onto the road. The first one appeared about 50 feet ahead of me, a shadowy silhouette standing dead center in the middle of the lane. I swerved hard, narrowly missing it, the tires screeching against the pavement. My car fishtailed, the headlights catching a glimpse of the figure as I passed. It was the man from the gas station, the one in the black hoodie. But his face, God, his face, wasn't human anymore. His mouth had been stretched impossibly wide, a jagged, toothy grin carved into his skull. His eyes glowed like static on an old TV, bright and blinding, burning into my brain. More of them began stepping onto the road, one after another, their heads snapping toward me as I swerved and dodged. Every time I looked at one of them, I felt it, the hum, that low, guttural vibration, like my skull was splitting open. I knew I couldn't keep this up. I don't remember when I started screaming. Maybe it was when I saw the second figure, a woman with her arms bent backward, her joints twisted like broken branches. Or maybe it was when I realized that the headlights in my rearview mirror weren't lights at all. They were eyes, two massive glowing eyes, hovering in the distance, always watching, always waiting. The GPS dinged again. I glanced down at the screen and my heart sank. You've arrived at your destination. There was no building, no landmark, no sign of civilization, just a clearing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by the silent, unmoving figures. The road ended abruptly, swallowed by dirt and gravel. and my car stalled the moment I crossed the invisible threshold. I tried turning the key, but the engine wouldn't start. The dashboard flickered, then went dead, and then the phone buzzed in my lap. The screen lit up, displaying a live feed of my car from above, like a drone was hovering directly over me. I could see myself, sitting frozen in the driver's seat, the figures closing in from all sides. Then the feed zoomed out, revealing the clearing from a bird's eye view. It wasn't just a random patch of land. It was a symbol, a massive, intricate design carved into the earth, like a crop circle, but far more elaborate. At the center of the design was my car, and surrounding it were hundreds of red pins, glowing like embers on the map. I wasn't the first person to end up here, and I wouldn't be the last. The figures reached the car. They didn't move like people, their limbs bent in unnatural directions, their heads tilting at impossible angles as they pressed their faces against the windows. Their eyes, God, their eyes were filled with static, like a TV with no signal, flickering and buzzing with an otherworldly energy. One of them reached for the door handle. I locked the doors, but it didn't matter. The handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, and the door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next. I remember the hum growing louder, the static filling my head until it felt like my brain was going to explode. I remember the figures pulling me out of the car, their hands cold and rough, their touch leaving a burning sensation on my skin. And I remember the red door. It wasn't there before, but somehow it was everywhere, floating in the air, glowing with that same pulsating energy I'd seen back in the strip mall. The figures dragged me toward it, their movements synchronized, mechanical, like they were all being controlled by the same force. I tried to fight, but I couldn't move. My body wasn't mine anymore. The door opened, and on the other side, I saw myself. Not a reflection, not a twin. It was me, standing in a room that wasn't a room, surrounded by walls that weren't walls, staring back at me with a blank expression. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The barricade by the door, the shattered phone on the floor, the half-empty coffee mug on the counter. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the red pin on my phone. It wasn't on the map anymore. It was on me. A tiny red dot glowing on my chest, right where my heart should be. And no matter how many times I try to turn off the app, delete the file, or throw the phone away, the pin always comes back. It's there now, as I'm writing this, watching, waiting. I don't know what's going to happen next. But if you're reading this, consider this your warning. Stay off the map, because once they've marked you, there's no way out, and sooner or later, they'll come for you too. I ordered a custom Rolex from a dark web website. The watch counts down to my death. Alright, let me start this off by saying I'm not exactly the kind of guy who goes around poking his nose into shady corners of the internet. I've heard all the stories, you know, the ones about the dark web, hitmen, organ trafficking, cults, all that disturbing crap. It's the kind of thing that makes for great Reddit threads, but it's not something I ever thought I'd be a part of. But life's funny like that. One bad decision can take you down a rabbit hole you never even knew existed. It all started with something harmless. I've always been into watches, Rolexes, Seikos, you name it. It's a dumb obsession, I know, but there's something about having a classic timepiece on your wrist that just feels, I don't know, timeless? No pun intended. Anyway, I've been saving up for a real Rolex for years, but every time I got close, life threw something at me. A car repair, rent going up, some unexpected bill. You know the deal. So when I came across this sketchy forum on Reddit, a place where people were bragging about getting authentic custom Rolexes for a fraction of the price, I got curious. Real curious. The thread was buried deep in one of those offshoots of r/watches, a niche subreddit that probably shouldn't exist. People were dropping cryptic comments like, try site X if you want the real deal, or check out the links in the sidebar, but be careful. One user even posted a picture of a Rolex with glowing hands and a caption that said, "This bad boy came straight from the deep web. Paid $500, worth every penny." Now, I don't know what possessed me to even entertain the idea. Maybe it was the fact that I was half a bottle of whiskey deep, or maybe I was just tired of waiting to own something I'd been dreaming about forever. Either way, I found myself downloading Tor and following some very specific instructions on how to access this mysterious marketplace. The website looked exactly like you'd expect, bland, with a creepy, stripped-down aesthetic. It was mostly a mess of categories, fake IDs, drugs, hacking services, but there was one section called Custom Items. That's where I found it, the Rolex listing. It wasn't just any Rolex, though. The description said, fully customizable, authentic parts, add unique features, watches that adapt to you. It was vague and weirdly ominous, but the sample pictures looked legit. They even had a chat feature where you could talk directly to the seller. So, I reached out thinking, what's the worst that could happen? The seller responded almost immediately. His username was just a string of random characters, X9345AG, or something like that. I told him I wanted a classic black and gold Rolex, clean and minimal. He said no problem, but then he asked if I wanted to add a personal touch. I should have stopped there, but again, I wasn't thinking clearly. What kind of personal touch? I typed back. A feature unique to you, something functional, something meaningful. I didn't even know what that meant, so I just threw out a joke. How about a timer that tells me how long I've got left in life? I laughed as I typed it, imagining some kind of quirky countdown that would end up being like 80 years or something. Just a dumb novelty. But X9345 AG's reply wiped the smile off my face. Done. I stared at the screen, confused. I didn't ask him to actually do it, but before I could say anything, he sent me an invoice. $499 plus shipping. I don't know why I went through with it. Maybe I didn't want to back out and look stupid. Maybe part of me was just too curious. Either way, I paid the Bitcoin and waited. 3 weeks later, the package arrived. It came in a plain, unmarked box. No brand logo, no receipt, nothing. Just the watch. And it was beautiful. Exactly what I'd asked for. Black and gold bezel, polished to perfection. The thing even had some weight to it, like a legit Rolex should. But there was one thing I didn't ask for. A small digital screen embedded into the face, just below the 6 o'clock marker. The screen was off when I first put the watch on. I assumed it was just some kind of gimmick, maybe a hidden feature I didn't know about. So I tapped the glass. Nothing. I twisted the crown. Still nothing. I figured I'd just leave it and deal with it later. But later that night, while I was lying in bed, scrolling through TikTok, The screen lit up on its own. I glanced down and nearly dropped my phone. It wasn't a clock. It wasn't a date. It was a countdown. 32 hours, 15 minutes, and 49 seconds. And it was ticking down. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, obviously, right? Some dark web troll was having a laugh at my expense. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I stared at that timer, the more it got under my skin. It didn't look random. It felt deliberate. Too deliberate. I googled everything I could think of. Rolex with countdown, dark web custom watch, countdown timer meaning. Nothing helpful came up. The closest I got was a Reddit post about an escape room game, but this didn't feel like a game. And here's the thing, I couldn't take the watch off. The clasp was stuck, like it had fused to itself. I tried prying it off with a knife, but the metal didn't budge. It didn't even scratch. I thought about smashing it with a hammer, but something stopped me. Call it paranoia, but I was starting to feel like this thing wasn't just a watch. It was connected to me somehow. By the next morning, the countdown was at 24 hours. That's when things started getting weird. The first time I noticed something was really off was the morning after I got the watch. The countdown had ticked down to 24:03:17, and every second that passed sent a weird, cold sensation up my arm. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was uncomfortable, like my body was reacting to something it couldn't understand. I tried to shake it off, literally, but the damn watch stayed glued to my wrist. I decided to go about my day like normal. Denial is a hell of a drug, right? I figured I'd head to work, maybe swing by a Starbucks, and just forget about this stupid thing. Pretend it didn't exist. But the universe had other plans. As I walked into the Starbucks near my office, I noticed people glancing at me. Not just regular glances, either. Staring. At first, I thought maybe I had something on my face, or my shirt, so I ducked into the bathroom to check. Nothing. I looked fine. But when I came back out, the barista, this college-aged girl with dyed purple hair, wouldn't take her eyes off my wrist. "Nice watch," she said, her voice flat. Her eyes didn't even flicker up to meet mine. She just kept staring at the watch. Thanks," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's new." "Where'd you get it?" she asked, her tone way too serious for what was clearly just small talk. Her question caught me off guard. "Online," I muttered, hoping she'd just drop it. She didn't. "Be careful," she said, leaning in like she was sharing some deep secret. "Watches like that, they don't just tell time." I didn't know how to respond. I laughed awkwardly and grabbed my overpriced latte, then bolted out of there as fast as I could. But her words stayed with me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. By the time I got to work, the countdown was at 22:45 and 12 seconds. It was still ticking, still mocking me. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I glanced at the watch, my stomach tightened. I kept telling myself it was a prank, that the seller had just rigged it to mess with me. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. Then came the email. I was sitting at my desk, trying to pretend I cared about the pile of reports in front of me, when my phone buzzed. It was from an address I didn't recognize. watchkeeper@obscureclockworks.net. The subject line just said, "Are you watching?" I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The email had no text, just a single image, a photo of me, taken that morning, walking into Starbucks. The angle was from across the street, like someone had been watching me from the shadows. My watch was visible in the photo, its eerie countdown bright against my skin. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. How the hell did they get this picture? Was the seller tracking me? Was the watch itself some kind of surveillance device? The thought made me feel sick. I immediately tried to reply to the email, but when I hit send, it bounced back. Undeliverable. Of course. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It was some random, unlisted area code, the kind you don't answer unless you're feeling adventurous or stupid. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking. A man's voice came through the line, low and distorted, like he was speaking through one of those voice changers. "The watch is synced to you now," he said. "Do not attempt to remove it. Do not tamper with it. And whatever you do not let the countdown reach 0. What the hell is this? Who are you?" I demanded, but the line went dead. Just like that. No explanation. No answers. Just a dial tone. I sat there, staring at my phone like an idiot, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. Stuff like this doesn't happen in real life. It's the kind of thing you see in horror movies or hear about in those creepy animated YouTube stories. But now it was happening to me. I was living it. I decided to leave work early. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't even a lie. The second I got home, I tried everything I could think of to get the watch off. I soaked my wrist in hot water. I froze it with ice. I even tried cutting the damn thing with a hacksaw, but the blade snapped like it was made of paper. Nothing worked. And then things got worse. Around 7 p.m., with the countdown at 18:22:9, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a photo. The account was private, with no profile picture and no posts, but the tag led to an image of a dark, empty street, a place I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Be here at 11 p.m., sharp, alone, or else." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. This had to be a mistake, right? Some sick joke. But as I looked closer at the photo, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The street lamp in the distance. It was bent at a weird angle, the exact same way the one near my apartment was. This wasn't some random street. It was my street. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend none of this was happening, but another part of me, the part that couldn't stop staring at that damn countdown, knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't go, whoever was behind this would come to me, and somehow I knew that would be worse. So at 10:45 p.m., I grabbed my phone, a flashlight, and the closest thing I had to a weapon, a rusty old hammer, and stepped outside. The streets were eerily quiet. No cars, no people, just the faint hum of electricity from the streetlights. As I approached the spot from the photo, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a figure standing under the street lamp, cloaked in shadows. They were tall and thin, their face obscured by some kind of mask. It looked homemade, like a papier-mâché skull painted black. In their hand, they held a small envelope. "Come closer," the figure said, their voice low and distorted, just like the one on the phone. I didn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead. The figure tilted their head, like they were studying me. "The watch is counting down for a reason," they said. "Follow the instructions, and you might live to see the end of it." "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty street. The figure didn't answer. They just dropped the envelope at their feet and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. like they were never there. I stood there, frozen, until the countdown ticked to 12:0:00. Then, with shaking hands, I picked up the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, sitting in my apartment, taken from inside the room. I don't remember walking back to my apartment. Everything after I saw that Polaroid is just blank. It's like my brain decided, yeah, you don't need this memory. Let's just cut this part out for your own good. The next thing I remember, I was sitting on my couch, staring at the photo. My hand was trembling so much, it was hard to focus, but there was no mistaking what I was looking at. It was me, sitting exactly where I was now, on the couch, wearing the same clothes, same position. The angle of the photo was wrong, though. It wasn't taken from outside. It was from inside. Whoever took it had been in my apartment. I snapped my head around, scanning the room like a maniac. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. The room felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My front door was locked, deadbolt and chain, but that didn't make me feel any safer. Whoever had been here before clearly didn't care about locks. The watch's countdown kept ticking. 11:45:32. It felt louder now, like I could hear it ticking in my skull. I checked every corner of my apartment, every closet, every cabinet. I even checked under the bed like a scared little kid. Nothing. No sign of anyone. But when I got to the bathroom, my stomach turned. The mirror was fogged up, like someone had taken a hot shower, but I hadn't been in there all day. And scrawled across the mirror, in what looked like black marker, was a single word: soon. My legs gave out, and I had to grab the sink to steady myself. My first instinct was to wipe it away, to pretend it wasn't there, but something stopped me. What if whoever had written it wasn't gone yet? I bolted back to the living room, slamming the bathroom door behind me. My breathing was ragged, and every sound felt amplified. Cars outside, the hum of my fridge, even the faint ticking of the watch. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the cops. The dispatcher sounded bored, like she couldn't care less that I was possibly about to be murdered. "Sir, you're saying someone was inside your apartment, but they're gone now?" "Yes," I snapped, "and they left a message. They wrote on my mirror, 'This isn't just some random break-in. Someone's messing with me.'" She sighed, like I was ruining her evening. "We'll send someone out to take a report." "Send them fast," I begged, but she'd already hung up. I paced the room, clutching the hammer I'd brought earlier. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the Polaroid on the table, as if it might suddenly change. The timestamp on it was burned into my brain now. 10:35 p.m. That was 25 minutes before I got the envelope. Whoever took it had been in my apartment while I was gone. By the time the cops showed up, the countdown was at 10:17:3. 2 officers came. One older guy, who looked like he'd seen it all, and a younger woman who seemed more nervous than I was. I told them everything: the watch, the countdown, the emails, the photo. The older cop didn't even bother hiding his skepticism. "So, you're saying you bought this watch from where again?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The dark web," I admitted. I sounded insane even to myself. "Uh-huh." He scribbled something in his notebook and exchanged a glance with his partner. "And this watch, it's telling you you're gonna die?" "I don't know what it's doing," I snapped. "I just know it's counting down to something, and whoever's behind this is messing with me." The younger cop piped up. "Can we see the photo?" I handed it to her. and her face went pale as she studied it. She didn't say anything, but she gave the older cop a look that said, "Maybe he's not crazy." The older cop sighed. "All right, we'll take a look around." They didn't find anything. Of course they didn't. The bathroom mirror, completely clean now, like the message had never been there. I didn't even bother explaining that part. I already looked like a lunatic. They took my statement, told me to call if anything else happened, and left me alone with the watch and my thoughts. At this point, I was losing it. My head felt like it was going to explode. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I decided to log back into the dark web marketplace where I'd bought the watch. Maybe the seller, X9345AG, could explain what the hell was happening. When I opened the site, my account was already logged in. I hadn't used it since the purchase, but somehow I was still signed in. A new message was waiting for me from X9345AG. Subject: read carefully. The message was short and cryptic. The watch is not a toy. It is bound to you now. It measures your time, your choices, your life. Every second matters. Do not let it reach zero, and do not ignore the tasks. Tasks? What the hell did that mean? I scrolled down, looking for more, but the message abruptly ended. Then my screen flickered, and a new window popped up. It was a live video feed. The camera was focused on a man tied to a chair in what looked like a basement. His face was bloody, and he was struggling against the ropes that held him. Behind him, someone stepped into the frame, a figure wearing the same black skull mask I'd seen earlier. They held up a piece of paper with 2 words written on it in bold black letters: "Your turn." I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. But when I looked down at the watch, I realized the countdown had skipped ahead. It was now at 5:59 and 3 seconds. I didn't understand. It was like I'd lost time somehow, like the rules of reality didn't apply anymore. My phone buzzed, and I nearly screamed. Another notification, another tag. This time, the photo was of my front door. The caption read, "Open up." I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire body felt paralyzed. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, I finally worked up the nerve to check the people. No one was there. I opened the door a crack, hammer in hand, and peered into the hallway. It was empty. But just as I was about to close the door, I saw it. Another envelope sitting on the floor. My name was written on it in messy, almost childlike handwriting. I picked it up and tore it open, my hand shaking. Inside was another Polaroid. This one was worse. It was a picture of my bedroom, taken from the closet. And in the corner of the frame, just barely visible, was the edge of a skull mask. I stood there, staring at the Polaroid, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that someone hadn't actually been in my closet, that someone wasn't still there. But the more I looked at it, the harder it became to lie to myself. I could see the details in the photo, the sliver of the door frame, the clothes hanging inside, and that faint outline of the mask peeking out of the darkness. I should have run. I should have grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, left my apartment behind, maybe even the city. But something about the situation felt inevitable, like there was no point in trying to escape. Wherever I went, this thing, these people, would follow me. That watch had become an anchor tied around my neck, dragging me down into something I couldn't even begin to understand. Still clutching the hammer, I forced myself to walk to the bedroom. My breathing was shallow, my fingers slick with sweat. The watch's countdown was at 5:01:07. The ticking seemed louder now, more rhythmic, almost like it was syncing with my heartbeat. When I reached the bedroom door, I stopped. The room felt colder than the rest of the apartment, the kind of cold that makes your skin crawl. The light was off, but I could see just enough from the glow of the streetlights outside. The closet door was slightly ajar, exactly like it had been in the photo. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at it. Minutes, seconds. Time didn't feel real anymore. My thoughts were racing, and all of them were bad. What was I going to do if someone was actually in there? What if they had a weapon? What if they were waiting for me to open the door so they could lunge at me? But the worst thought, the one that made my stomach drop, was, what if they're not even human? I couldn't take it anymore. I raised the hammer, gripping it tight in my sweaty hand, and kicked the closet door open with all the strength I had. Nothing, just clothes, shoes, and a couple of cardboard boxes. The closet was empty. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. As I backed away, my foot hit something. I looked down and saw another Polaroid lying on the floor. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I picked it up, my hands trembling. This one was worse than the last two. The photo showed me, right now, standing in my bedroom, holding the hammer. It had been taken from the corner of the ceiling, like someone or something was watching me from above. I froze, my eyes darting to the ceiling. Nothing, just the same cracked paint, an old light fixture that had been there since I moved in. But then I noticed something else, the faint sound of breathing. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, swinging the hammer wildly, but there was no one there. The room was empty. The breathing stopped. My own breath was coming in short gasps now, and I felt like I was about to pass out. I stumbled out of the bedroom, back into the living room, and collapsed onto the couch. The watch's countdown was at 4:45:32, still ticking, still mocking me. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time, it wasn't from Instagram. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You're wasting time." I stared at the message, my mind racing. I didn't want to respond, but some part of me, the part that needed answers, couldn't resist. "What do you want from me?" I typed back. "Why are you doing this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Follow the rules. Complete the task, or it all ends." Before I could reply, another text came through. It was an address. No explanation, just a location about 10 miles from my apartment. I should have ignored it, called the cops again, done anything but what I actually did. But at this point, I was desperate. My gut told me the countdown wasn't just a scare tactic. Whatever happened when it hit 0 was real, and it wasn't going to be good. I grabbed my car keys and headed out. The streets were empty, which made the drive even more unsettling. Every red light felt like a trap, every shadow like it was hiding something. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. The address led me to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. It was one of those places you drive past during the day without giving it a second thought, but at night it looked like the setting for every horror movie ever made. The parking lot was overgrown with weeds, and the building itself was covered in graffiti. A single light flickered above the main entrance. As I stepped out of the car, the watch's countdown hit 2:59:59, less than 3 hours left. I walked up to the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave, but I couldn't. Not now. The door was unlocked, of course, and it creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, and the only light came from a series of dim, flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. There was a table in the center of the room. On it was a laptop and a knife. The laptop screen lit up as I approached. A message appeared, written in bold red letters. You have one task. Complete it, and you live. Fail, and the countdown hits 0. Underneath the message was a live video feed. It showed a man tied to a chair, his face covered by a black hood. He was struggling, his muffled screams echoing through the warehouse. Beside him stood someone in the black skull mask, holding a phone. They turned toward the camera and pointed at the knife on the table. A new message appeared on the laptop. Kill him. You have 30 minutes. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of twisted joke. But when I didn't move, the figure in the video stepped closer to the man in the chair and pressed a knife to his throat. The message on the screen changed. Tick-tock. I looked down at the watch. 2:30:12. Time was running out. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything but stand there and stare at that knife. I didn't know who the man was, why he was there, or why I was the one being forced to do this. But as the seconds ticked away, a horrifying realization set in. If I didn't do it, I was next. The people behind this, they weren't bluffing. They'd already been in my apartment. They'd already proven they could reach me anytime, anywhere. I picked up the knife. The knife felt heavier than it should have. Its cold steel pressed against my palm as I stood there, staring at the laptop screen. The man on the video feed thrashed in the chair, muffled screams pouring out from under his hood. The figure in the black skull mask stood motionless beside him, their presence more oppressive than anything I had ever felt. My mind was spinning, screaming for an exit, a loophole, anything that would get me out of this nightmare. But every time I looked down at the watch, the countdown kept ticking, relentless and unforgiving. 2 hours, 29 minutes, 14 seconds. I tried to reason with myself. This can't be real. This is some elaborate prank. No one actually expects you to kill someone. But the other half of me knew better. I'd seen the Polaroids. I'd heard the voice on the phone. Whoever was behind this wasn't bluffing. They'd already invaded my life in ways I couldn't comprehend. This was real, and I was running out of time. The laptop chimed, breaking the silence. A new message appeared. Do it, or we choose someone else. Underneath the text, another feed popped up. It was my apartment. The camera was pointed at my front door. My breath caught in my throat as I saw movement. A woman, my neighbor, Claire, was unlocking her door just across the hall. She paused for a moment, looked directly at my door, and then disappeared inside her apartment. The message updated, HER. I staggered backward, almost dropping the knife. My mind was screaming at me now, panic crawling up my throat like bile. They were watching my apartment, watching her. If I didn't do what they wanted, they weren't just coming for me. They were coming for the people around me. Why? I shouted, my voice echoing off the empty walls of the warehouse. Why are you doing this to me? No answer, just the cold hum of the laptop screen and the unrelenting ticking of the watch. 2:15:47. I had no choice. I knew it. They knew it. But knowing didn't make it any easier. My legs felt like they were filled with cement as I crossed the room to the only other door in the warehouse. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The room inside was dark, but not silent. I could hear him, the man from the video, his muffled cries echoing through the space. A single bulb flickered above him, illuminating just enough for me to see the setup. The chair, the ropes, the hood. He was just a man I didn't know, someone who had no idea why he was here, and yet I was supposed to kill him. I stepped closer, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to stop, to drop the knife and run, but every time I tried, my mind flashed back to the Polaroids, to Claire, to the countdown on my wrist. 1:59:3. I hesitated, standing just inches from the man. His head snapped up, even with the hood covering his face, as though he could sense me there. He struggled harder against the ropes, his muffled cries turning into frantic, animalistic wails. "I don't want to do this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I don't want to." But as I raised the knife, my phone buzzed again. I froze. Another message. "You hesitate. We move forward." Below the message was a picture. Claire, in her apartment, sitting on her couch, completely unaware that she was being watched. I screamed in frustration, slamming my fist against the wall. This wasn't fair. None of this was fair. But it didn't matter. These people, whoever they were, didn't care about fairness. They only cared about control. I turned back to the man in the chair. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry." He let out one last muffled scream as I drove the knife into his chest. The sound. I'll never forget that sound. Wet. Gurgling. The kind of noise that doesn't even seem possible until you hear it for yourself. He jerked violently, his body convulsing as the blood spread across his shirt, and then he stopped moving. I stepped back, the knife falling from my hand, clattering to the floor. My legs gave out, and I collapsed, trembling, my hands coated in blood. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at what I'd done. The laptop chimed again. Through my blurred vision, I saw a new message. "Congratulations." I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, to scream at it, destroy it. But then the countdown on the watch stopped. The screen went blank. For a moment, I felt relief. Like maybe it was over. Maybe they'd leave me alone now. But that feeling didn't last. The laptop screen changed again, and this time, it was another live feed. My apartment, my front door, and standing there, facing the camera, was someone in the skull mask. I bolted out of the warehouse, not caring about the blood on my clothes, not caring about anything except getting home. The drive felt endless, every red light, an eternity. When I finally pulled into the lot, my heart sank. My front door was wide open. I ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and burst into my apartment. The living room was trashed, furniture overturned, drawers ripped open, everything scattered across the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the Polaroid sitting on the coffee table. It was Claire. Her body was sprawled across her couch, her throat slit, her lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Written on the back of the photo, in the same messy handwriting as before, was a single sentence. "You took too long." I fell to my knees, screaming, my voice raw and broken. This wasn't supposed to happen. I'd done what they asked. I'd followed the rules. But it didn't matter. They'd done it anyway. They killed her anyway. And then the watch lit up again. A new countdown. 23, 59, 59. Underneath it, 3 words burned into the screen. Next task. Soon. I threw the watch against the wall, but it didn't break. Of course, it didn't. Nothing about this was breakable. Nothing about this was escapable. This was my life now, a life of tasks, a life of death, a life of them, and I know this is only the beginning